All right, today we're going to pull back the curtain on something that affects pretty much all businesses, but most people don't even know it exists. We're talking about the invisible rules of fair play and competition. These are called economic torts, and you can basically think of them as the fouls that can get you into some serious legal trouble in the game of business.
I mean, have you ever really thought about this stuff? Where do you draw the line between just being a smart, aggressive competitor and doing something that's flat out illegal? In the business world, that line can feel, well, incredibly blurry sometimes, right?
Well, it turns out these aren't just tough questions for a business class. They're actual legal questions. And the answers are found in this really fascinating area of law called economic torts. This is the legal framework that helps separate a brilliant move from just a dirty trick.
The best way to think about it is like this. Economic torts are the official rulebook for the game of business. They're what the referee, the legal system, uses to call a foul and make sure that even though competition is fierce, it's still fundamentally fair.
So, let's start with one of the most common fouls you'll see on the field: directly meddling with someone else's business deals.
It's got a bit of a fancy name, inducing breach of contract, but honestly, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's when you deliberately, intentionally, get someone to break a contract they have with somebody else, and that somebody else ends up losing money because of what you did.
The whole dynamic here is a classic three-player game. Just think of it as ABC. You've got Party A, who convinces Party B to bail on their contract with Party C. Now, the key thing here is that Party A never had a deal with C, but it doesn't matter. They're still on the hook because they're the one who intentionally caused the whole mess and the financial damage that followed.
Okay, but what happens when just persuading someone isn't enough? Well, that's when things can get a lot more aggressive. Now we're talking about the real hardball plays. We're talking threats and conspiracies.
First up in this category is intimidation. And listen, this is way beyond just tough negotiation. This is about using an unlawful threat. We're talking a threat to do something illegal, like commit a crime or break your own contract, all to force someone's hand so that it ends up hurting a third party financially. And you know what? We can use that same ABC framework to understand this. So A makes an illegal threat to B. B, not wanting to deal with the consequences, gives in. And because B gave in, C ends up getting hurt financially. Once again, A is the one liable to C because they basically used B as a weapon.
So, what happens when it's not just one person playing hardball, but a whole group of people teaming up? Well, that brings us to the tort of conspiracy. It's pretty much the law's answer to ganging up on someone in business.
Now, conspiracy isn't some one-size-fits-all thing. There's a really crucial distinction to make here, and it all boils down to intent. With conspiracy to injure, the main, number one, overwhelming goal has to be to hurt the victim. But with conspiracy by unlawful means, the harm just needs to be an intended result. It doesn't have to be the primary motive, as long as illegal methods were part of the plan. See the difference? It's subtle but important.
Okay, so we've covered actions. Let's pivot now and talk about words. Because let's be real, especially in our digital age, falsehoods can be an incredibly powerful weapon, and the law has very specific rules for this.
Two big ideas here often get mixed up: malicious falsehood and defamation. Here's the simple way to tell them apart. Malicious falsehood is all about protecting your wallet. You have to prove you suffered a specific financial loss. Defamation, on the other hand, is about protecting your good name, your reputation. And even defamation itself comes in two flavors. First, there's libel. That's defamation in a permanent form. Think of a written article, a blog post, a social media comment. It's considered more serious because it sticks around. Then you have slander. That's temporary, like a spoken comment that just disappears into the air. With slander, you usually have to prove you actually lost money because of it.
So if you want to win a defamation case, you basically have to prove three things. It's a simple checklist. First, the statement actually had to be defamatory. It lowered your reputation in the eyes of others. Second, it had to be clearly about you. And third, it had to be published, which is just a legal way of saying it was communicated to at least one other person besides you.
But hold on, what about freedom of speech? This isn't a one-way street. The law is smart enough to provide some really powerful defenses to make sure people aren't scared to speak their minds.
The biggest, most powerful defense of all is justification. Or, to put it simply, the truth. If what you said is substantially true, you cannot be successfully sued for defamation. The truth is basically an absolute shield. End of story.
Then you've got the fair comment defense. This is the one that protects opinions. Think of a movie or restaurant review. Now, for this to work, it has to check a few boxes. It must be an actual opinion, not a statement of fact. That opinion has to be based on facts that are true. It has to be an opinion you honestly hold. And it has to be about something the public has a legitimate interest in. You can't just make things up and call it an opinion.
And there are other important shields too, like something called privilege. This basically gives people immunity for things they say in specific situations, like in a courtroom or in Parliament, to make sure that in those important settings, they can speak freely without constantly looking over their shoulder for a lawsuit.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway from this whole legal referees rulebook? What's the point?
Well, it all really comes down to a very delicate balancing act. On one hand, economic torts are there to protect businesses and people's reputations from genuinely unfair and malicious attacks. But on the other hand, they have to be careful not to crush the vital principles of free competition and free speech. It's a constant push and pull.
And this leaves us with a really critical question for our time, doesn't it? In an era of viral social media posts and hyper-aggressive startups, where information moves at the speed of light, figuring out how to apply these old principles is getting more and more complex. Where exactly do we draw that line today between a smart business move and an unlawful one? That's the challenge these rules are constantly up against.